Up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dewbs Co.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock, I'm Michelle Dewberry and this is Dewbs Co, the show where we'll get into some of the things that have got you talking today. Now, Nato expansion. We'll all be familiar by now that when President Putin ordered his war against Ukraine, a large part of his justification apparently was NATO expansion. But now, with Finland and Sweden both poised to join, did his plan backfire? And tasers. Today it's been announced that all volunteer police officers in England and Wales will be able to use them. Good idea or an escalation that's unnecessary? And the new Doctor Who was unveiled recently and will be played by a gay black actor. Today his sidekick Rose has also been revealed and will be played by a transgender woman. Am I being a bit harsh then when I ask, are we living in a world where box ticking is the order of the day and is even more important than talent? If so, what next? All that to come, but first, the latest news headlines.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Miranda Shunker in the GB newsroom. First tonight, a Conservative MP has reportedly been arrested on suspicion of rape and sexual assault offences. The unnamed man is also accused of abuse of position of trust and misconduct in a public office. That's according to a Scotland Yard statement reported by The Sun. The alleged offences are said to have happened between 2002 and 2009. He's been asked to stay away from Parliament during the investigation. A serial rapist who attacked women over nearly 3 decades has been found guilty of murder at Reading Crown Court. 66-year-old Donald Robertson was convicted of killing Shani Warren. Her body was found bound and gagged in Taplow Lake in Buckinghamshire in 1987. He was charged after a police cold case team discovered new DNA evidence linking him to her death. He was also found guilty of kidnapping and raping a teenager in 1981. Thames Valley Police's principal investigator, Peter Byrne, described Robertson as a predator.
It's difficult to put into context what these young girls and women went through, but without a doubt, Robertson is an evil and dangerous man. What shocks me is the the amount and the length of time that Robertson has been out committing these horrendous crimes, it appears that he was invariably caught and punished, but within a few months of being released, he was committing further serious offences.
The European Union has warned it will respond with all measures at its disposal if the UK breaks the Northern Ireland Protocol. European Commission Vice President Maros Sefcovic says practical solutions to problems have been offered, but the UK has failed to meet them halfway. The Foreign Secretary has set out plans to rewrite Britain's post-Brexit trading agreement, changing the rules on how goods enter Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK. Liz Truss says the government is still open to negotiations and the new measures don't break international law.
This is not about scrapping the protocol. Our aim is to deliver on the protocol's objectives. We will cement those provisions which are working in the protocol, including the common travel area, the single electricity market, and North-South cooperation, whilst fixing those elements that aren't, on the movement of goods, goods regulation, VAT, subsidy control and governance.
Well, the Prime Minister says there are pragmatic solutions available to resolve the issues.
We can make some changes, I think, to the protocol, which is not the law of the Medes and the Persians. I agree. It's there in Article 13.8 that if things aren't working, you can change it. Plus, it makes it very clear on the face of the text that you should ensure the East-West trade and the integrity of the UK internal market. So let's fix it.
Well, the Prime Minister has also defended plans to give volunteer police officers powers to use tasers, saying it's the government's crucial duty to make sure communities are safe. Under new Home Office plans, special constables will be allowed to carry tasers if authorised by their chief officers. Amnesty International is calling the move dangerous, though, saying misuse can lead to harm and even death. But the Home Secretary says the measures will ensure volunteers are not at a disadvantage when facing knife attackers or terror threats.
Also authorising special constables to carry tasers. And your voice is called for these important changes. And it actually speaks to a point that Steve has made about the investment in training, investment in our officers, but also the investment in the skills and the resources when it comes to policing. And I have to say, I know many of you feel that you've waited a long time for a Home Secretary to be on your side and listen to your calls for change. Not only have I listened, I've acted.
And the Queen has made a special appearance at London's Paddington Station today, officially opening Crossrail's completed Elizabeth line. Alice Porter reports.
The Queen took everyone by surprise when she suddenly appeared at Paddington Station. People may have complained about the delayed Crossrail project, but it was all smiles as Boris Johnson and the Mayor for London, Sadiq Khan, welcomed the monarch and her youngest son. Her Majesty looked round the station entrance to the Elizabeth line, which has been appropriately designed in royal purple. She also met train drivers and station staff and unveiled a plaque to mark the completion of the project. The Elizabeth line runs from west to east and officially opens next Tuesday. And should the Queen wish to visit again, she was given her own Oyster payment card. Despite recently struggling with her mobility, the 96-year-old went to the Windsor Horse Show on Friday and on Sunday was the guest of honour at an equestrian event near Windsor. But today is the first engagement that the Queen has been to outside of the Windsor area since she attended the Duke of Edinburgh's memorial service in Westminster Abbey 7 weeks ago. With only 2 weeks to go until the Platinum Jubilee weekend, it seems as if everything is on the right track. Alice Porter, GB News.
Well, you're up to date on TV, online and DAB plus radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Dewbs Co.
Thanks for that. Well, keeping me company until 7 o'clock tonight. My panel, we've got author and journalist Peter Hitchens, cultural historian Dr. Philip Kisley, and Joe Phillips, a political commentator. Good evening to all of you. And to you, Peter, your first time. We'll try not to scare you off. And you know the drill on this show, don't you? It's not just about us and our thoughts, it's about you at home as well. What is on your mind tonight? What do you think about the stories we'll be discussing, and anything else, quite frankly? You can get in touch with me on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at GBNews. Don't forget, of course, you can subscribe to us on YouTube, download our app, listen to us on DAB Plus Radio. We're everywhere. So wherever you are tonight, you are very welcome. My first email came in tonight already. No messing around. Kevin in Liverpool. Quick off the block there, Kevin is from Liverpool. Got in touch to say he is disgusted with me and has lost all respect for me. This is a good start to the show, Kevin. What can I say? It's all about, I asked a question on Twitter, so I did, about, you remember all the Liverpool fans booing the national anthem, etc. I asked a simple question. If you're booing the national anthem, the Liverpool fans, do I assume, therefore, that you will be boycotting this new bank holiday, all about the Jubilee, set up to celebrate the Queen? I thought it was quite a sensible question, and I stand by it. So if you did boo the national anthem, what are you going to do? Are you going to stay at work and continue working that day as kind of some rebellion? Or are you going to be like Kevin and be very unhappy with me indeed? Anyway, let's get to our top story, shall we? Let's talk about NATO expansions specifically, because we'll all be familiar by now that when President Putin invaded Ukraine, one of the primary reasons, in fact, he gave for doing so was the potential expansion of NATO. Now, this afternoon, Finland's parliament has voted overwhelmingly to apply for membership. Of course, it doesn't just stop there. You've got Sweden in the same situation, but Turkey has said that it's opposed to the two countries joining because of their stance on Kurdish militants. Now, when it comes to the whole kind of expansion of NATO, there's a whole kind of different set of perspectives on this. I'll start with you, Joe. Where do you sit on this? Do you welcome the expansion of NATO? Do you think it's a good thing?
Yes, broadly speaking, but I think it's something that will change inevitably the sort of geopolitical security map of Europe, if you like. I mean, Sweden and Finland, who've applied to join, as you mentioned, they've always been neutral. But because of what's happened in Ukraine and because of the aggression that Putin has shown in his attack on Ukraine and the proximity of the borders, you can understand quite well why they want to join NATO. But of course, you've got the double-edged sword, if you like, that although Putin, apparently speaking at some meeting or other in Moscow, said he doesn't have a problem with it, although he had warned them there would be grave consequences, so he clearly does have a problem with it. Do you risk provoking by doing this?
Well, do you think we do?
No, I don't. I mean, I think if you were Finland or Sweden, you actually have an absolute duty to protect your borders and protect your people.
Do you think there's any legitimacy in what Putin would say, which is one of the reasons that he's done what he's done in Ukraine, is because of the expansion of NATO? Do you think that's reasonable or not?
Absolutely not. I mean, I think we've all of us are guilty of sleepwalking, letting him get away with what he did in Crimea several years ago. We sort of turned a blind eye to that. That's why we've got a war. The effect of that war in Ukraine is affecting all of us, whether it's the cost of fuel, it's the cost of wheat, it's the cost of cooking oil. It's having an effect on all our lives. So, no, I don't think there's anything.
But, I mean, just to come in on that, I don't think there's any need for them to join NATO, because I think Putin's got his hands full in Ukraine. He can't wage another war on a northwestern front. He simply hasn't got the military capability. I think that's one thing. I understand where you're coming from in terms of the... it's not an excuse. Expansion, enlargement isn't an excuse, but I think that has drummed up revanchist sentiment in Russia, and Putin's used that as a propaganda tool, and that's been. People have talked about that. Historians, I'm thinking of George Kennan in particular, in the 1990s, predicted 2014, but also predicted pretty much what was going on now in Putin way back about 25 years ago. So I think it's a really complex one. Obviously, it's a really difficult one, and I'm not making excuses for Putin's a monster, but I don't think they need to join. I really don't, because I don't think there's a threat to them.
But they clearly think there is, and we can't help. NATO countries cannot help Ukraine in the way that we could help another NATO member.
Yeah.
But that's not true. NATO countries can help. There's nothing in the NATO treaty that stops them from helping. The whole thing is, in a way, a dead issue. The NATO alliance was an alliance against the Soviet Union, which should have been wound up in 1991 when the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact collapsed, and it had no real reason for existing. It was revived in the 1990s against, as you rightly said, against the opposition of George Kennan, probably the most brilliant diplomat who ever lived, who said this insults all the Democrats in Russia. It will bring about the very consequences it claims to be against. It's been exactly the disaster he predicted. The only issue which has ever united Henry Kissinger, the ultra-Metternich-like statesman, and Noam Chomsky, the ultimate left-wing commentator, is they both are against NATO expansion. They both thought it was stupid, as I did, and for a long time pointed out the dangers of it to no response at all. There's almost no understanding of the issue in the West. Hardly anybody who talks about it in the West even knows that the United States overthrew, in a violent mob putsch, the legitimate government of Ukraine in 2014. This is when the crisis began, and not when Putin staged his stupid, barbaric invasion, but in 2014. Everything, all the bad things that happened to Ukraine date from the 2014 putsch. No, it's a complete disadvantage in this discussion, as I've found over the past several weeks, to know anything about the subject, to have been there, to know the history of it, or to have any conception of what's going on. But the thing is out of date now. Two things have happened. One, it's been established beyond doubt, as I've also been arguing for years, that Russia's supposed vaunted military power is rubbish. Its army is weak, its navy is useless, its equipment is bad, its discipline is poor, and we've now seen this, all the evidence of this. The idea that Russia, which has the gross domestic product of Italy, can somehow dominate and take over the whole of Eastern Europe was always a fantasy. It's not true. Oddly enough, I think probably Finland and Sweden are both better defended outside NATO than they are in it.
Well, I think Finland's got a tiny army, but it's one of the best armies in the world.
Very good.
It's one of the best armies in the world.
Very good army.
I think there's another point here which is really interesting, and it's Turkey, isn't it? And it's as Michelle said, and Turkey is doing to NATO from the inside what Putin's doing from the outside, and completely, negates the.
But Turkey is the fly in the ointment of this, and to a certain extent, you can see where it sits politically, geographically, and strategically. Whether or not, President Erdogan said that don't bother coming to talk to me, I will not be persuaded otherwise. But my understanding is that it has to be unanimous of all NATO members in order to allow new members in.
It's a fascinating thing that NATO contains Turkey, just as it used to contain Portugal when it was a dictatorship. It's not exactly what people think it is. Turkey, amongst other things, occupies North Cyprus in much the same way that Russia occupies Crimea. And there's no NATO sanctions against it. No. Since under Erdogan, it has certainly ceased to be a free country. There's no rule of law there. Erdogan has locked up many more journalists than Putin ever has, but gets away with it because he's a NATO member. And this is, because of the geographical position of Turkey, that will remain. I would imagine some deal will be stitched up. But all this idealization of one simply good, wonderful, angelic side against one terrible, bad, horrible side is such nonsense.
But what's
in
driving
international
that,
politics.
Peter? What is driving that? Because people are not stupid, like you say, or people, they're not au fait with what happened, say, in 2014 or whatever. There's a lot of very sensible, intelligent people, actually, that are choosing to have a very simplistic, binary, goody, baddie, simplistic level of conversation. Why do you think that is?
Because it's because a large part of my trade simply hasn't covered this thing properly. I was writing about the Ukraine language problem and the difficulties between the Russians and the Ukrainians in Ukraine many years ago, and the problems over Crimea and the Don Basin. I know where these places are. I've been to them. But could I get anybody to listen? No, nobody was interested in it until it exploded. It exploded because nobody had been interested in it. And this is very often the case. What you can do about it, I don't know. I have this huge advantage in my life. I lived in the Soviet Union when it collapsed. I saw it collapse. And I feel I have a duty to tell people things that they don't know, because I had this enormous privilege. And from those to whom much is given, much is required. So I make myself very unpopular by pointing out that factually, most people who go on the television talking about Ukraine haven't the foggiest idea what they're talking about.
So
not even the slightest.
So, Peter, what do you think the end game is for Putin?
What's happened now is, by the way, we're always telling everybody what this war is about and what Russia's military intentions are. We don't know. They've never announced them. I've searched and searched for this. People keep saying, he said he would take Kiev within 7 days. He never did. We don't know what they were planning to do. My own strong feeling is that it's more or less it's a protection racket raid, that he's saying it's a nice place you've got here. Now you've behaved badly towards me. I'm going to smash it up. It's basically it's a piece of gratuitous, stupid, brutal violence to deter people from behaving like that again. But it may well turn, as a result, into a very, very long war indeed. Well, notice one thing about it. In all the wars of my life, the United Nations and all the major countries were constantly saying, let's get peace, let's have peace talks, let's try and bring this to an end. There is no sign of this at all. The United Nations seems to have gone on holiday. There is absolutely no effort being made to end this war. Why is that?
I think there's one other thing, just very quickly, Michelle, just to come back to to the original question, and I think it's people want to vicariously live. Listening to the reporting, and especially the correspondent of the main channel, live the drama and live the emotion, and it's almost kind of voyeuristic in a way. And
I think that's really unfair. No, journalists who are reporting. I think it's easier for people to see a war where they can recognise people who live a life that they also live. We saw this in the Balkans.
Maybe it's just the tone, but I listened to that particular channel first thing in the morning when I wake up, and she's saying, "Oh my God, it's so terrible, and it's okay not to be okay," and it's framing it in a way that our chattering classes understand, and it's indulgent.
War reporters are fantastic people. They're incredibly brave. We owe an awful lot to them, but they describe. They do not explain. They're in one isolated place. They cannot see the broader picture. You cannot place on them the burden of explanation.
I'm not just talking about the report. I'm not just talking about the reporters, though. I'm talking about the studio as well, and the whole thing. It's a construct of emotion that people really buy into and enjoy.
I think that's really.
That's what I think.
Unfair.
Unfair to whom?
I think it's an unfair description. I mean, I don't know what channel it is that you're talking about.
You can guess that.
Well, I can't actually, because if you're talking about BBC Radio 4, which I listen to, that is not the same that I hear. You can hear.
I definitely get that.
You hear people like Michael Clark, Professor Michael Clark. You hear good analysis. I mean, Peter's right. A war correspondent or a reporter is not the same as an analyst who's sitting at the back, who knows a lot more.
Yeah, I don't mean just, as I've just said, I don't just mean the correspondent. I mean the whole thing. And if you listen to, I've listened to it for the whole time. It really does give me that feeling.
Have you ever heard, for instance, in any of this discussion, the fact that Zelensky, for whom I have quite a lot of regard, as a matter of fact, he's been brave and principled and stood up for himself in a way which has to be admired. He was elected to get peace in Ukraine, and he tried very hard to do so, and it was partly his own army which frustrated, they've insulted him publicly and frustrated his attempts to get a peace deal. And this extraordinary fact is not known, I would have thought, to something like 99.9% of most people who watch British television and listen to British radio. They don't know it. Zelensky was a peace president who was frustrated by his own army from getting a perfectly available peace deal called Minsk II, which could have stopped all this from happening, left all the people who are now corpses alive, and all the destroyed towns still standing, and all the refugees still living in their own homes. And it wasn't pursued because of reasons which are not known among most of the people who pontificate about it. Shocking.
And that's part of the problem, though. I mean, to go back to your point, Philip, and Peter's been a foreign correspondent and worked in many interesting and dangerous places over his career. But part of the problem is actually getting it to be on the news, on the front pages. I mean, given that, quite a lot of newspapers nowadays are focusing more on Rebecca Vardy and Colleen Rooney, it's amazing to me that Ukraine is still leading or up there in the top of bulletins, because we've forgotten Afghanistan, we've certainly forgotten Yemen, we don't talk about Syria anymore. There's an awful lot of stuff going on around the world, and it is always a problem, as any editor will tell you, particularly for television. How do you keep it up there? How do you keep it in the public mind when it is I do believe broadcasters do have a duty to inform and educate as well as entertain.
I fully agree, and I'm not in any way, shape or form negating the scale, the monumental scale of the tragedy, and you can't listen to these things and you can't engage with these things without feeling that. It's just that I think there's something else going on as well, and if Peter says, well, if people don't understand, why are people interested in it? I think there's a sense of vicarious, I don't want to say thrill, but there's a sense of we can't feel these things. We can't be nationalistic or patriotic, at least, but these people are. My God, it's interesting watching them. I really do get that.
Is there not a sense that there's only one view you can really take? I get on social media called a Putin apologist. I get accused of taking money from the Kremlin. I hate Putin. I think he's a sinister tyrant. I was so horrified by when he invaded. I could barely speak for rage. And yet I get accused of these things by people who want to shut down any serious debate on this issue. And it's extraordinarily difficult to find, as I say, on any radio programme or any television programme, a discussion which actually says there's more than one side to this, that this isn't a simple matter. Everyone has to fly the Ukrainian flag. Marks and Spencer's has just decided to rename its Chicken Kiev. In that stage where everybody has to have the same view. Well, that's always wrong. During the Vietnam War, for instance, there were plenty of people arguing on both sides all the time. And I remember that, and it was extremely useful, vibrant, and it stimulated a proper democratic discussion.
Do you think
not having now?
Do you think the Russian perspective should have been shut down? So, for example, RT, Ofcom kind of very quickly got rid of that. Do you think that was right or wrong?
Well, I don't think we had anything to fear from RT. Nobody watches or listens to it anyway. I think it looked a bit petty to me. I don't see why people shouldn't be allowed to watch this stuff if they want to. If our side, such as it is telling the truth, then what does it matter if another side is lying? RT exposes itself as a disreputable channel all the time anyway. So my view is generally don't censor if you can possibly avoid it.
Well, Joe, I mean, when we talk about a single view only is permitted, that leads me nicely onto the Labour Party. The reason for why I bring this up is, for example, John Healey, who's Shadow Defence Secretary, of course, he said, Labour is the party of Nato. I mean, he says quite a large quote as well surrounding that, but it's all around this. Keir Starmer says the Labour Party is not to accept the false equivalence between Russian aggression and the acts of Nato. Young Labour have had their social media accounts stopped because they dared to basically question some of what was going on. They questioned, they signed a letter, a Stop the War correspondent, like the Stop the War, anti-kind of war.
War Coalition.
Yeah, so they had their social media accounts taken over and put on, I don't know if I've got the message, and if I have, I'll pop it up on the screen so you can see it. Basically, the Labour Party wasn't happy with that narrative. You had lots of MPs, Labour MPs, that had signed a letter, Stop the War, a letter that removed their signatures from pressure because of the likes of Keir Starmer. Do you think that's healthy? That a political party can dictate you must have this stance, this view?
No, I don't. And I'm not an apologist or an expert on the Labour Party, but I think in broad terms, no, of course you shouldn't. You should have open and robust discussion, and you should be a broad church where different views. But, we know what damage Jeremy Corbyn did to the Labour Party.
But I'm not talking about Jeremy Corbyn. I'm talking about a position, a position on NATO.
Position was, very anti-NATO. Jeremy Corbyn's position was very anti-war. Now, the social media, I think, is an absolute hornet's nest. And I think we would probably all agree that it can be...
But you're diverting from my point. My point is the Shadow Defence Secretary has come out and said Labour is the party of NATO. That is essentially the line you've got to toe, full stop. It's not about Jeremy Corbyn, it's not about whoever. It's about, do you think it's right, sensible or appropriate for a Labour Party, or any party, quite frankly?
If you're the member of a political party, you sign up to whatever it is, and you have the discussions within those forums, whether it's at conferences or local branch meetings or whatever the particular forum is, so that you come up with a policy. I mean, that's what,
Well, that's what we used to do when I was a Trotskyist. In the little sects that I belonged to, we had this thing called democratic centralism, where you discussed it, and then having discussed it, there was one view and everybody had to take it. The democratic parties have a different view. The Labour Party, particularly on issues of peace and war, has been deeply divided throughout all its existence. Ramsay MacDonald opposed the First World War in 1914. and later went on to become leader of the party and prime minister. It's a long tradition in Labour of people being against war and taking dissenting views. I do find it slightly distressing to see political parties shutting down the debate with them. Where else is it going to take place?
But I think that's part of a broader trend, actually, on the left, which is just about shutting down freedom of expression, full stop.
It's not just on the left.
Yeah, it's not just on the left.
No, maybe not, but it's very much on the left.
Well, the left had the original idea, but I think quite a lot of allegedly conservative parties have found it convenient to follow their example.
But I mean, you know, you're absolutely right, Peter. You go back to the sort of old student union days and you'd spend hours deciding whether you were going to support Nicaragua or somebody else, or, you know, the Sandinistas, or whichever it happened to be that week.
I mean, Wilson wouldn't even enter the Vietnam War, but he still had a lot of opposition from his left. In fact, my brother was in the Labour Party Young Socialists at the time, and they were all expelled for opposing his policy on the Vietnam War. But the opposition remained. There were a number of Labour MPs of good standing who were still openly against Wilson's policy, which was itself quite left-wing for the time.
I mean, there is an element of, you know, party discipline. And certainly if you're an elected member of Parliament and you're a member of a parliamentary party, you would be expected to, you know, buy into that policy.
I just think it's very peculiar. I think saying, actually, I don't want conflict, I want peace, saying, actually, some of these organisations, they might be potentially antagonising situations rather than constantly kind of dampening them, I think that's a very valid opinion to have. So I find that very peculiar that you would be told you're literally not allowed to express that view, and if you do, you'll have either your whip taken off you or whatever else the consequences will be.
It was ever thus.
It's the simple principle espoused by the man everybody claims to agree with, John Stuart Mill, about liberty. Even if the one person who disagrees is wrong, it's important that he should be heard or she should be heard, so that the ideas which are accepted by everybody else are tested.
Well,
that's what democracy and freedom are all about.
I completely agree with you. And one thing I always say on this channel, because I know that when we try and have debates or conversations around the kind of the way forward with the conflict in Ukraine or around Nato or even some of the justifications or causes perhaps of this conflict, I know lots of you, it really does divide opinion. And there's a certain group of viewers who will be quite angry that we're trying to have the conversation with both sides. I say, as I always do, I think it's incredibly crucial to do so, and long will I continue to do that. So when we come back, I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, I've got some of your responses to what we've just been hearing discussed on the panel, and I also want to talk to you about tasers. Where do you stand on this? Do you think that the police should essentially be armed with tasers now? It's been rolled out to voluntary police officers as well. A good thing in your view, or not? I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dewbs Co.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Coming up on The Mark Steyn Show. As the Bank of England warns of apocalyptic food prices, Laura Perrins joins to discuss her take on spiking inflation. Natalie Winters has uncovered evidence which proves face masks have no use whatsoever when it comes to COVID. Plus, a Tuesday treaty. Former US presidential candidate Michelle Buckman won't be holding back when it comes to the World Health Organization's apparent plan to take over the world. All that and more on The Mark Steyn Show from 8 o'clock.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. A quick reminder as to who's keeping me company tonight. Author and journalist Peter Hitchens, cultural historian Dr. Philip Kisley, and Joe Phillips, who's a political commentator. Lots of response, I have to say, from you guys at home listening to that last debate about NATO expansion. Lots of people very grateful that we're having kind of a two-sided conversation here, as opposed to the one singular conversation that you often hear. Jill says, Michelle, every country has the right to join NATO. We cannot keep running scared forever because of threats from Russia. It has to stop now. Alan says, totally disagree with Peter. NATO is a defence organisation. His analysis of Russian motives is simply wrong. Martin says, I write in firm support of Mr Hitchens' brave and accurate stance on the Ukraine situation. So lots of mixed views coming through, just as it should be. I like that. Different opinions are healthy and good. Lots of you talking about the expansion. Will it go ahead? Of course, pointing out the whole situation around Turkey, rejecting it. So we shall see what happens with that. Lots of people appreciating you being here, by the way, Peter.
Oh, nice. Well,
yes. I'm going to try really hard, see whether or not we can try and not scare you off. That's what we try and do on Dewbs & Co. Get you back. Get you back for more, don't we? Right, so let's move on to our other story, shall we? There were 37,000 assaults on police officers in 2021. That's according to the latest figures we have. Over 11,000 officers were injured. As a result, now, Home Secretary Priti Patel has approved the use of taser stun guns for volunteer police officers. What do we think to this? It's got quite a big reaction online, I can tell you. Someone who's been on the front line is former Met police officer Peter Blexley. He joins me now. Good evening to you. Peter, where do you stand on this? The expansion of tasers now. So if a voluntary police officer wants to use one, has the training, etc., they can. Is this a good idea in your mind?
Undoubtedly. Volunteer police officers, special constables as they're otherwise known, so often now patrol alongside regular officers, and they face exactly the same kind of dangers. Unfortunately, some people in society choose to use our police officers as punch bags, and even worse. So it's only right that we give the tools to those who protect us so that they can protect themselves.
But what would you say back to someone who says that actually essentially arming the police more and more is only going to escalate a situation when really what we should be seeking to do is de-escalate?
Police officers are being assaulted in record numbers, many of them hospitalised, some of them so badly injured that they never return to work and their careers are ended prematurely. And unfortunately, this is where our society is at. We've tried restraint, but in response to the increased violence, the police have to do something. And let's remember, they don't arm themselves with tasers purely to protect themselves. On many, many occasions, a taser is deployed and used to protect the public, because that is the major part of the police's role.
So where would you draw the line then, Peter? Is this enough in your view, a taser? People just have a taser? Would you want more people to be armed potentially with guns or anything like that? Or are you happy to stop at the taser level?
I fear that this may be the thin end of the wedge, and that if society continues to be increasingly more violent towards police, we may, perhaps long after I'm dead and buried, have a fully armed police service. But I happen to know many, many officers serving today would simply walk away because they would not want to carry a firearm. Many are happy to carry a taser, but would draw the line at carrying a firearm. Because, to be perfectly frank with you, most police officers join to protect life and property and not to take someone's life.
Peter Blexley, former Met police officer there, thank you very much for your time. Philip, where do you stand on this issue?
It's really interesting listening to Peter there, and I find myself agreeing with him, but I think we're focusing on the wrong thing here. We shouldn't be arming police officers or voluntary police officers. We should be disarming, de-arming the general public. We should be focusing on knife crime and stopping it. We should be really thinking about why we are such a violent society, why we're such a divided society. And it's almost like it's an inappropriate response to something that's it's a plaster almost, a sticking plaster to a really terrible disease. And I think we really need to look more at cause than effect.
And that's great ideologically, but at the end of the day, if you're a police officer in the here and now, when guns are on the streets, knives are on the street, people are being violent, I appreciate all your sentiments about how nice it would be if that wasn't the situation, but that is the situation. So then, now that we are in the here and now, do you support then these people having tasers as standard, essentially?
That's why I say that I listen to him and I'm sympathetic with him, because I think the answer's probably got to be yes, even though it kind of sticks in my throat.
Well, there's no, probably when it comes to me, there's no way for love nor money, Peter. You won't get me out on the street as a police officer in this day and age. If I wasn't, I'd want to be armed to the teeth, quite frankly, to deal with some of the squirts that kind of walk the streets. Where do you stand on it?
Well, how did we get here is where I stand on it. And we got here by a series of serious mistakes which could be reversed and should be reversed. And when I was growing up in this country, the police were present. They were everywhere to be seen, on foot, patrolling, preventing crime and disorder from happening. They had excellent relations with the public. They generally knew all the people on their beats, and they were known to them. They knew who the bad guys were as well, and they were very well placed to nip all kinds of trouble in the bud. In the 1960s, under the Home Secretaryship of Roy Jenkins, this system was deliberately ended. I've written a history of it. The decision was taken to stop having foot patrol. People say, oh, we can't have it now because we haven't got the numbers. Actually, the numbers were far fewer. At the time, the police had many more duties than they have now. They had to protect industrial premises, they had to do all the parking offences, and they had to do prosecution. And they did not have tens of thousands of back office, white-collar staff helping them with any of that. There were many fewer of them, and they did the job. Since they stopped doing it, there's been much more violence in the streets. One of the main reasons for the level of violence, I have to tell you, is the use of drugs, illegal drugs, by large numbers of people. This is one thing the police have failed to control. Many, many years ago, they decided they were not going to bother to continue to arrest or prosecute people for possession of drugs. And since they stopped doing that, the amount of drug abuse in this country has grown enormously. There is a fascinating website, which I commend to all your viewers, called Attackers Smoke Cannabis, in which the compiler has actually gone through thousands of local newspaper reports in which the person involved in serious violent crime has actually been a user of cannabis, a drug the police and our society, and apparently the Mayor of London, view as harmless, completely wrongly. That's several things they could do. For the meantime, sure, I mean, I don't want any more police officers to die or be injured. For the meantime, OK, protect yourselves as well as you can. But until you get round to re-establishing proper preventive policing, as it was originally designed by Robert Peel and the early Metropolitan Commissioners, which can be done and is actually cheaper than what we have now, then this will get worse. And it will be guns in 10 years' time. We'll be saying, shall we be arming special constables with Glocks? Because otherwise it'll be too dangerous for them to go on the streets. If you want to stop it happening, change the policy. If you want it to carry on getting worse, carry on doing what you're doing.
Joe?
Well, I agree with Peter. You've got to tackle the root cause. You know, my son is a paramedic. They're not armed. The number of times that he and his crewmates have been assaulted really, really violently, and quite often in positions or in situations where it's behind closed doors in somebody's house. It's not on the street. They're not armed. They wouldn't want to be armed, and neither should they. And their first duty is to protect life, to save life, and to take people to hospital. So, you know,
but they would be supported by the police officers. So
yes, but the police officers aren't always there when this is happening. You know, an ambulance will be quite often the first call. So the point is, you don't necessarily have to be armed. I don't have a problem per se with this. It is with the authorisation of a senior officer. It is also after certain training. But, you know, volunteer community support officers, however terrific they are, what they're doing is what Peter's arguing, which is providing the visible presence. But to be perfectly honest, in many, many cases, they are just wandering about. I mean, the town I live in, we don't even have a police station. Lots of places don't have a police station. And if you see a police officer, you think there's a fancy dress party. And I know that sounds facetious, but you don't see police officers walking around, that thing of getting to know people. Now, I know, you know, they're overstretched, they're under-resourced, but certainly in rural communities where people don't bother to report crime, a taser's not going to make the difference.
But they're overstretched. And
of course they're overstretched.
They're under-resourced because they're doing the wrong thing. You could have 5 million police officers doing what they do now, and it wouldn't work.
No.
If you wait for trouble to break out and then charge in a fast car with a siren to it,
it's
you
too
will
late.
not prevent it from happening
exactly.
ever. It never works.
No.
The whole system was originally designed clearly as prevention, and it worked extremely well, and it was not abandoned because it didn't work. It was abandoned to save money. In fact, we ended up spending far more money. And one of the fascinating things about it is the 999 call scheme. Originally, you called 999, you got through. Now they simply have to triage the calls. It's impossible to handle them. Whereas before, when the police were going out into the streets, making themselves known to the public, they heard of crime before it happened.
Exactly.
Well, I can tell you I'm getting a mixed response on this. Steve has emailed in saying, Michelle, 99% of violent crimes are on innocent citizens. So why then don't we allow innocent citizens to have tasers? Violent crime is going up and the police are rarely even there to help us. So why can't we defend ourselves? I certainly don't suggest that people should wander the streets with tasers themselves. Got to be honest. James has said, if the police, Michelle, had a different attitude to the public and weren't so authoritarian, then they might not be experiencing the levels of violence that they are. Patricia says, if we had a proper legal system that actually punished the criminals, we would be in a better situation to not need tasers. I just want to be clear, by the way. There is a difference, by the way, between a special constable, which is what this applies to, what we're talking about now, and a police community support officer. I think sometimes people mix up the two. Special constable is sworn into office by a magistrate or judge and has full powers of arrest. They carry handcuffs, baton and CS spray, and that's the group that we're talking about there. A police community support officer is a uniformed civilian with no powers of arrest. They're not equipped with equipment such as handcuffs, batons and CS spray. They are used to provide a visible deterrent on Britain's streets to reassure the public. And that latter part, I would say, is more in line with what you were just saying.
You don't see them.
But that was the point that I was just making. They just walk about and they might as well be in
They don't walk about. If all the police in this country were abducted by aliens, how long would it take most of us to notice?
But you see, I think
they're just not there.
But I think we do see these kind of these special what's the correct term? The community support officers. But I'm going to be probably a little bit unkind now, because if I saw one of those, and let's just say I was in trouble for doing something wrong, and they tried to reprehend me, I'm not sure that I would take them that seriously.
Yeah.
And I'm not being rude if any of you are one of those. I'm just trying to be honest about if I saw a volunteer police community support officer, I'm trying to give you your right titles. I'm not sure. Would you, Peter, if you saw someone in that role, kind of...
But they've got no powers. They've got no more powers than we have.
Their uniforms are especially marked to make them look as less powerful than a police officer. You can clearly see when you see them coming. It was a public relations effort. I think quite a lot of people become PCSOs to try and become full-time police officers, and they think it's a good way of doing it, but and one has to sympathise. But no, I don't think it did anything to actually undo the real problem, which is the withdrawal of police constables from the streets.
And I think a point allied to that is that police officers are treated so badly, and I know because my cousin was a police officer for 25 years, that people just don't want to go into the force anymore. It's like teachers, you know, they're treated so badly and all their powers are taken away from them. People don't want to go into the profession.
I mean, the Police and Criminal Evidence Act of 1984 was a disaster. It treated them all as if they were untrustworthy.
Yeah.
Which, of course, most of them were not.
Well, Robert's
very dangerous.
Robert's been in touch on email saying, Michelle, will all those opposed to tasers, I wonder if they'll go up to volunteer to go against some thug with a knife or any other weapon without their taser? Well, I can tell you straight, I wouldn't. There's no way for love nor money I would become a police officer in this country. Certainly not if I wasn't armed. Carmen says, the calibre of police today is so bad, I don't trust them to pick their own nose. I've got to say, Carmen, I think you're being a bit harsh if you are a police officer watching this, are you getting a bad rep here? Are you unhappy with what you're hearing? Get in touch with me and let me know. Have you been asked, by the way, to carry a taser? And how would you feel? Would you feel comfortable about doing that? Because one of the problems with all of this, you get asked to carry all this stuff, don't you? You get asked to use them in the course of your duty. And then when something goes wrong, you know, there's no shortage of people that very quickly will want to come down on you like a ton of bricks. What do you think to that? Coming up, I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, Doctor Who. Do you care about Doctor Who? I don't. I don't watch it. I haven't watched it for ages.
In one thing.
Yes, you can.
Any of us here have attacked individual police officers at all?
No, not you.
No, but none of us have, because we know that they have a very difficult job to do. We sympathise with them personally. But the police force, and in fact the people who run it, and the government, which has designed it like this, they are the people who deserve criticism.
Well, there you go. I didn't mean you. I meant Carmen.
No, I just thought sometimes people...
Anyway, that's Peter Hitchens. He does not care about my break music getting louder and louder. He's going to tell you. He's got no discipline. This is very true. I like him. You can come again. Right, I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to ask you, do you care about Doctor Who? I don't. However, I can't help but notice the new character, the new actor playing Doctor Who is gay and black. And now today, being announced, his sidekick is a trans woman. All seems a bit weird to me because I can't help but think, are we casting people based exclusively on their talent, or is this desperate need now overtaking things to tick diversity boxes? If so, Peter Hitchens, middle-aged white man, does not bode well, does it?
Middle-aged?
Yes, right.
Old.
Let's go take a break. I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Coming up on Dan Wootton tonight, as the gender wars rage on, activist Cara Bell, who lived as a trans man in her teens, shares her story of transition regret that you won't hear in the liberal media. Plus, it's a night of unfiltered opinion from expert commentators including Nigel Farage and my superstar panel. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dewbs Co.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. Now, Lorraine has been in contact. We were just discussing tasering, whether or not it's a good idea for the new kind of the voluntary police to be armed with tasers. I absolutely think yes, it is. Lorraine says nonsense. My son was having a mental health crisis. The police drew a taser and red dotted him when he was simply trying to run away. She says no weapon, no threat other than him being a big boy. Thank God, she says, he dropped to the floor when they went on to pepper spray him. She says that is not great for mental health situations. Well, keep your thoughts coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. My panel tonight keeping me company, author-journalist Peter Hitchens, cultural historian Dr. Philip Kisley, and Joe Phillips, who's a political commentator. Now, Doctor Who, do you care about Doctor Who? Do you watch it? I neither care about it nor watch it. However, I couldn't help but notice today that when announcing their new series, we learned, didn't we, the other day, that the Doctor Who, the current actor, he's gay, he's black. The new sidekick, Rose, is a transgender actress. And I've got to say, I'm really sorry to be so blunt, but I find it all a little bit weird. I'm really into talent, and you get your job based on your kind of abilities and all the rest of it. But it's getting to the point now where I can't help but notice and ponder, are we focusing more on diversity and box ticking these days over talent, Joe?
No. Both these people are experienced actors, but you might as well say that having Rose Ayling-Ellis do Jackanory, the deaf actor, who won Strictly Come Down, you might as well say that's a tick box exercise, and it's not. I mean, it's absolutely fine. I don't watch Doctor Who either, but I mean, it's great that a deaf actor is going to do Jackanory in sign language, isn't it?
So you think this is all nothing to see here, folks? Move along.
Yeah, exactly.
OK, Philip, this is your bag, isn't it? It's your speciality.
It is my bag, but alas, I don't watch Doctor Who
You've got to be
either.
super quick. Get your bag out quickly.
I do think it's a box-ticking exercise. The difficulty with it is even if these actors are brilliant, which I'm sure they am, they'll always be seen as a box-ticking... They'll always be seen as a box-ticking exercise. And it's also social engineering with children, and that's the thing that I'm really concerned about.
Peter?
Well, I hope they are brilliant, because I actually am so old that I watched the first appearance of the Daleks on a flickery black and white television screen. And I was so thrilled and terrified by it, and nothing that I've seen on Doctor Who ever since has remotely approximated to that. If they can get that old magic back, I don't care who they are. If they can't, I'm afraid it's too bad.
Well, there you go. That's the panel's thoughts. Let me know your thoughts. I find it all a little bit peculiar, if you ask me. I find it just a desperate attempt to try and tick boxes and say, look, we're doing this. We've got a gay person, I almost said a straight person, but that would be hilarious, wouldn't it? Because try being a straight, middle-aged kind of guy these days. I don't even think you'd get cast as a straight, middle-aged guy these days if you was one of those. Anyway, that's all we've got time for, pretty much. Let me know your thoughts if there's anything else you want us to discuss on tomorrow's programme. But for tonight, I'll say thank you and good night. Thank you very much to my panel. There's been lots of positive responses to you three. You can come again as long as you... next time, though, my after 10, the break music will be even louder, so yeah, is it? Right, so that's all we've got time for. Nigel Farage up next. Nigel, what have you got for me?
Michelle, good evening and thank you very much. Well, apocalypse, is it really going to happen? Because that's what Andrew Bailey, the Governor of the Bank of England, said. And I've got to tell you, he may say that, but what about all the other problems people are facing with fuel prices, inflation? And you can't just blame it. You can't just blame it all on the war in Ukraine. He's covering up for his own failings. Is the apocalypse really coming? We'll debate that at length tonight on Farage. First, the weather.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. The weather's on a bit of a repeat cycle at the moment. Plenty of fine, bright, sunny weather by day. Thunderstorms around in the evening and at night. Here's the culprit. Big area of low pressure, but way out west and throwing weather fronts our way, but also drawing up warm and humid air from the south, hence the risk of thunderstorms. Some big downpours around at the moment, and so we'll see more of those heavy downpours across northern England and Scotland through the evening. The potential for a bit of lightning and thunderstorms across East Anglia and the southeast, but they all tend to clear away, so most places dry for much of the night, turning drier across Northern Ireland through the evening. Temperatures dropping down to 9, 10, 11 degrees Celsius generally, and for most it's going to be a fine day tomorrow. Yes, there'll be some showers, certainly through the morning across the Highlands, the Northern Isles and the Western Isles, but even here they should tend to drift away. And for most it's dry and bright, hazy sunshine for most of the day. Perhaps not quite as warm as today, but temperatures still getting a touch above average, high teens, low 20s, maybe 24 there.